The night was frigid. Under the fine drizzle that fell over the city, the cold seemed to gain even more strength. On the edge of an avenue, by the bank of a murky and abandoned river, a woman and her blind husband were bent over, rummaging through a trash can. Their clothes soaked by the dew, their bodies trembling but their hands persistent. They were searching for anything, perhaps scraps of food, something that would allow them to endure another night under the bridge in the makeshift shelter made of scraps of wood and plastic. It was a scene of desperation that no one would want to witness. But there they were, invisible to most, fighting for survival in a world that ignored them. Then, across the street, a man known for his immense fortune, Elon Musk, stopped to observe them. What might have crossed his mind in that moment? He who had built empires, revolutionized industries, and possessed the power to change the future. He looked at those two souls with nothing, and something within him seemed to shift. How many times have you passed by a situation like this? How many times have you closed your eyes to the pain of those who have lost all hope? That woman, her husband, they were not there by choice, but by a cruel twist of fate. Yet there they were, under the weight of cold and hunger, without a place to call home. Elon Musk could have turned away, like so many others have done. But there are moments when even the most powerful man is left disarmed by the stark reality. The life of that woman and her husband could have slipped into oblivion, but in that instant, under the rain and the starless sky, Musk's gaze seemed to see more than just numbers and technology. What goes on in the heart of someone who sees such misery up close? How do we react when suffering confronts us, unannounced? Can you imagine what goes through the mind of someone who has lost everything? Who has not even a promise of tomorrow? They cling to the bare minimum, to the scraps, while we go on with our lives, often without noticing. And what of those who have the power to do something, to transform the lives of these people with a simple gesture? Do you believe that everyone would act, or would the majority simply look away? But in that moment, Elon did not look away. He continued to observe. The woman, trying to comfort her husband, who trembled from the cold. The makeshift shelter under the bridge, which barely protected them from the intensifying drizzle. And the river, with its dark, trash-filled waters flowing just below. That scene, so distant from the life of someone like Musk, suddenly felt closer. Did he see himself in that woman, and that man? Or did he see the failure of a system he helped create? If you were in Musk's place, what would you do? Would you continue on your way with a clear conscience? Or would you feel the weight of responsibility on your shoulders? It's easy to say we would do differently, but what about in practice? What truly moves us to act? In that moment, Elon seemed frozen in time. The car beside him, the security detail further ahead, but he remained Perhaps fixed, trying to understand. looking, perhaps questioning how this was still possible. And you? Have you ever wondered how many people like that woman and her blind husband exist right now searching for something in a trash can? Have you stopped to think about the luck we have in not being in their place? It's not just about the lack of food. It's about the dignity that has been stripped away from them. The makeshift shelter under the bridge is just a shadow of a home. And you? Have you taken a moment to reflect on what is truly important? In the midst of our daily concerns, have we forgotten what really matters? Musk, with all his fortune, couldn't solve everyone's problems, that's true. But in that instant, a decision lay before him. And if it were you, what would you do? Would you have the courage to face the reality, or would you look away? What holds you back from acting? As the rain fell harder and the night deepened, the woman and her husband continued, unaware that they were being watched. The cold wind cut through, but they had no other option. And we? What have we done with the options we have? The silence between the three seemed to freeze time. The drizzle had now turned into a heavier rain, running down the edges of the woman's tattered clothes, while the blind man stood beside her, not understanding the gaze coming from afar. Elon Musk, inside the car, continued to watch. It was impossible to guess what was going through his mind, but something about that scene had penetrated beyond the surface. The woman, unaware of being watched, gently pulled her husband's arm. "I think we won't find anything here, love," she murmured, her quiet voice lost in the sound of the rain. She looked around, searching for a sturdier shelter, but the bridge under which they lived offered little protection. Her tired eyes expressed a mix of resignation and fragile hope, a hope that seemed at odds with the reality they were immersed in. Inside the car, the billionaire remained still. His security detail looked at him, waiting for a command, but he didn't move. It was as if something was holding him back. How many times had he passed similar situations? How many times had he closed his eyes to such scenes, buried in his grand projects, his ambitions to colonize Mars, to create a more advanced future? But here, in this moment, there were no rockets, no artificial intelligence, only a woman and her husband, soaked and hungry, at the mercy of a reality Musk seemed to have forgotten still existed. What truly weighs more on the scales? The conquest of new worlds or the inability to care for those living in our own? It was as if there, before that scene, he was being forced to confront a truth he had always evaded. Have you ever stopped to think about what really matters? In the hustle and bustle of daily life, in the pursuit of success and stability, have we forgotten to look around us? And what goes through the mind of someone who has nothing left to lose? The woman and her husband had no idea they were being watched by someone so distant from their reality, someone who, if he wanted to, could change their lives in the blink of an eye. But can money alone heal the wounds of the soul? Or is there something deeper here, something that all of us neglect? The blind husband's hand rose in an almost automatic gesture, searching for his wife's face. He didn't need to see to know that she was worried, that the night would be long and hard. "We'll survive this night too," he said, his voice hoarse and low. It was a silent promise, but she knew just how fragile it was. They had survived so many other nights. But how long could they keep it up? How long can the body endure when the soul is already so battered? Musk, sitting in the car, took a deep breath. He could feel the tension building inside him, a discomfort that seemed to invade every part of his being. Why couldn't he just leave? He could have told the driver to move on, to leave that image behind, like so many times before. But something about that woman, that man, made him hesitate. What would he do now? Would he take action? Or would the fear of facing reality win over him, as it does for so many others? And you? If you were in his place, what would you do? The rain, now relentless, fell heavily, soaking the asphalt and forming small, dirty puddles around the makeshift shack. Musk's car remained parked, the engine still running but the headlights off. Inside, the billionaire seemed frozen. He stared at the couple in front of him, but something more troubled him. Perhaps it wasn't just the blatant misery laid bare there by the filthy river. It was as if that scene had dragged him back to something he didn't want, or couldn't, face. The blind man, unaware of what was happening around him, spoke again with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the storm. "We've been through worse, remember?" His voice was soft, almost resigned. However, the woman remained silent. She could no longer maintain that apparent calm. Her eyes, once searching for something in the distant horizon, were now fixed on a nebulous point, caught between anger and despair. Inside the car, Musk seemed on the brink of something. Fingers from one hand drummed on his knee while the other remained rigid on the steering wheel. His security team watched him through the rearview mirror, unsure of what to expect. Then, as if whispering to himself, he murmured something inaudible. It was a word he hadn't repeated in years, perhaps a buried memory or a reminder of a promise he had made to himself. What was he trying to avoid? The woman let out a long sigh, as if she was about to make a decision. She looked around, then at her husband, and began to speak, but her voice trembled as she tried to form the words. "We can't keep going on like this," she finally said, almost breathless, as if each syllable was a burden. The husband turned toward her, his blind expression searching for answers. Ultimately, she could no longer hold back her tears. It was a silent scream from someone who could no longer bear another night of uncertainty and fear. And it was at that moment that something, a forgotten piece of the puzzle, began to emerge. Musk, still silent, continued to observe them. But now, his gaze was no longer just one of curiosity or empathy. There was something more. Something in the way he looked at them, as if he recognized something he didn't want to admit. What did that woman and her husband mean to him? The woman leaned closer to her husband and then, suddenly, she began to speak of a place that Musk would never expect. "I told you we should never have come back here. This place only brings us pain," she said, her voice choked with tears. "But you insisted. You always believed there was still something here for us." The blind man furrowed his brow, as if trying to remember something that had slipped away over time. But the woman could no longer hide what she had been carrying in her heart. "This place, it destroyed us." Musk leaned back in his seat as if her words had hit him hard. There was something there, something he knew or feared he knew. The expression on his face changed. And in that instant, as if the weight of the revelation was unbearable, he closed his eyes, trying to suffocate a memory that threatened to explode to the surface. What did he know about that couple? Where was that growing discomfort coming from? Outside, the woman knelt beside her husband, and her voice grew even softer, almost a whisper. "They never told the whole truth, did they? They never revealed what really happened that summer." The blind man remained silent, but his hand squeezed her arm tightly. There was something in that moment, a shared pain between them, a secret neither wanted to relive. And Musk, still watching, was now breathing deeper, his eyes wide open as if he was about to make a discovery that would change everything. What had happened that summer? Who were they really? And why, after all this time, did this encounter feel like more than just a coincidence? Across the street, under the rain, the woman lifted her face, and for a brief moment her eyes met Musk's. She didn't know who he was. Or did she? The silence between them was now a palpable tension, as if the answers were right there, ready to be revealed but still hidden in the shadows of the past. And you? Have you ever felt like you were on the verge of discovering something that could change everything? Something that both binds you and distances you from the truth? What did Elon Musk know about that woman, that blind man on that cold, rainy night? The silence between Musk and the woman was now like an invisible bridge. The rain continued, hammering the asphalt and the shack in the background, but none of it seemed to matter. Those fleeting seconds when her eyes met his carried a truth that still lingered in the air, unsaid but impossible to ignore. She looked away, perhaps out of fear, perhaps recognizing something she didn't want to confront. But what did she know about him? And why did Musk, the most powerful man in the world, seem so shaken by a couple invisible to society? Inside the car, Musk leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, as if the weight of that night was finally crushing him. He tried to focus on something else, anything else but the image of that woman, and what she had just said echoed in his mind. They never told the truth about what happened that summer. Those words, raw and heavy, carried a profound meaning, pulling him back into a past he had buried long ago. His heart began to race. The memory he had been suppressing now fought to emerge. A summer, a place, people he hadn't seen in years, and a secret he had sworn to himself he would never reveal. What exactly had happened? Musk squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push that image away, but it was useless. The pieces began to fit together, one by one, in a puzzle he wasn't prepared to solve. Outside, the woman slowly turned to her blind husband. She whispered something, but this time, Musk couldn't hear. He saw the gesture, the care with which she held the man's hand, the way she guided him, as if carrying the weight of both on her shoulders. But there was more there, something hidden in the subtext of their gestures, something she was about to reveal, unaware that Musk, just a few meters away, was listening to every movement. And then, as if an invisible thread pulled her toward the truth, the woman spoke again. They never came back. No one else cared. But I never forgot what I saw that day. Her words were like tiny needles piercing the silence. That factory. People say it was an accident, but I saw what they did. Musk felt a jolt of shock run through his body. What was she saying? A factory. An accident. Something he had tried to erase from his memory. The blind man, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. "Are you sure you're not confusing things?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if trying to soothe something within her. But she shook her head, firm, her voice trembling. "No. I know what I saw. They never wanted the truth to come out. And we've been stuck here ever since. They never cared. Never looked back." Musk was now at a point of no return. There was something about that couple, something tied to a past he had never wanted to confront. He remembered that factory, the place where it all began, where he made his first big bets, the summer that changed his life, but also the summer when something went terribly wrong. The details started to come back in flashes. The fire, the people, the chaos, and then the silence, the muted media, the backstage deal. He had moved on, as those in his position always did, but some never managed to let it go. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry with tension. Was he, unknowingly, face to face with the survivors of that tragedy? He recalled one detail he had always avoided remembering. Among the victims, there was a young woman who managed to escape, but no one ever spoke of her. It was as if her story had been erased, just like the lives of so many others. Musk looked back at the woman, now more intently. There was something in her face he hadn't noticed before, a resemblance that twisted him inside. The way she moved her hands, the tone of her voice, the contained strength in her gaze. And suddenly, the question he had been avoiding formed in his mind. Could she be? Deep down, Musk had always known that the ghosts of the past would one day catch up with him, but not like this. Not on that night, under a relentless rain, beside a filthy river, in front of a couple he never thought he would encounter again. The woman was now closer to the truth than he was prepared to admit. "Have you ever faced something like this? A part of you that you preferred to keep buried, but that comes back forcefully, in an unexpected way?" He clenched his now sweaty hands against the steering wheel. It was clear that this moment, this encounter, was not accidental. There was something more. Something that, no matter how hard he tried, he could no longer ignore. Musk could no longer look away. The rain was now a distant noise. The world around him seemed to dissolve, as the truth, once suffocated deep in his mind, began to emerge mercilessly. Everything he had tried to bury, hide beneath layers of success and fortune, was there before him, in the form of that woman and her blind husband. Musk's mind was racing. What would he do with this? And more disturbingly, what did she really know? The woman, exhausted from fighting against memory, seemed increasingly aware of something. She held her husband's arm, as if he were the anchor keeping her in the present, but her words were trapped in the past. "No one ever came back to give us answers," she said, her voice heavy with bitterness. "But I knew that one day somehow he would return." Musk, still motionless, felt a growing tightness in his chest. He. That word struck him like a blade. Was she talking about him? Panic began to spread inside him, discreet but relentless. His name had never been directly involved in the factory tragedy. He had always ensured that his image remained intact, that the incident would be forgotten. But perhaps not completely. "I tried to tell the truth back then," the woman continued, as if speaking more to herself than to her blind husband. "But who would believe someone like me? They just wanted to silence what happened, bury it all." Her eyes closed for a moment, and she took a deep breath, as if that memory still consumed her every day, even after all these years. And now, Here we are, trapped, as if our lives ended that summer. Musk felt his stomach churn. The past, the summer she mentioned, the accident. Was she one of the survivors? Or worse, one of those he never knew existed? He thought he had controlled every aspect of the situation. But now, standing there by the bridge and under the rain, he realized there was a crack. A breach he had never considered. She turned her face to the side, as if sensing his gaze, even though she didn't know exactly who was watching her. But there was something in her posture, in her hesitant way of speaking, that indicated she was getting closer to uncovering what he feared. "I remember that day like it was yesterday," she murmured, her voice trembling, filled with sorrow. "I remember the faces. I remember the promises. I remember how they said everything would be okay." Musk clenched his fists. Her words echoed in the walls of his mind. Promises. Faces. But he had never made a promise directly to her, had he? Or had his mind was now disordered, trying to pull fragments of old memories, sifting through details he had blocked out. Was it possible that their paths had crossed back then, without him realizing the significance of it? The blind husband, who until then seemed disconnected from the conversation, turned his face vaguely toward the woman. "Do you still think he will come back? Do you think he cares about what happened?" The man's tone was resigned, but there was something more behind those words, a shadow of doubt. The woman bit her lips as if holding back a bitter truth. "I don't know. But the truth has a strange way of finding its way back, no matter how much they try to hide it." Musk stood frozen. That phrase seemed to cut through the air. The truth was approaching him. He was now caught in a dilemma. If he stayed, the woman might make the connection, might realize who he really was and what had happened that summer. If he left, however, the past might never let him go. He knew somehow that the situation was slipping out of his control. It was no longer just a matter of conscience or responsibility. It was something deeper, something threatening to surface at any moment. Musk felt the tension rise. Did she already know who he was? Had she recognized him without saying a word? Or was it just a tragic coincidence, a collision of two worlds so different that now seemed inexorably intertwined? But there was another possibility, something darker. What if the blind husband knew more than he let on? The air around Musk felt increasingly thick. Every word from that woman, every vaguely directed glance towards him, weighed down like it was about to collapse upon him. The rain pounded hard against the windshield, the rhythmic sound amplifying the tension, like an invisible clock counting down the seconds until the revelation he dreaded so much. He looked again at the couple, the woman still holding her blind husband's arm, as if they were bound by a shared bond of pain. That factory, that summer, the memories started to fit together cruelly. Musk knew that the accident had been worse than the public ever knew. The fire that devastated the site, the secrets buried alongside it, the lives trapped in between. He had thought for years that this was part of a distant past, but there on the edge of that road the memories were alive again. The woman turned to her husband. She was different now, as if a decision was forming inside her. "I always said the truth would come out someday," she murmured almost to herself. The man only nodded wordlessly. Musk, on the other side, felt a pang of fear. Did she know? Were they recognizing him, but waiting for the right moment to confront him? Or was he about to be discovered without even saying a word? The woman slowly stood up, her body soaked by the rain, but the determination in her eyes was now clear. She looked at her husband, and for the first time, the touch between them felt heavier, as if something unsaid was being communicated in silence. "He's here. I can feel it," she said with a haunting calm, looking around as if she knew someone was watching them in place, his body paralyzed by the certainty that she wasn't just speaking of a vague feeling. She knew, or at least, she was close to discovering. The silence inside the car was as thick as the air outside. He knew he needed to decide quickly. Leave, disappear before the truth was complete, or face what was to come. But what would happen if she confronted him? What could come from that encounter? The blind husband, still seated, spoke softly, but his words resonated with unexpected strength. If he really cared, he would have shown up before. Do you think people like that feel the same weight we do? His question carried not only resignation but something deeper, something that, no matter how hard he tried to hide it, escaped in the subtext. A bitterness, perhaps, a resentment. Musk felt the impact of those words like a wave dragging him away from the safety he had built around himself. Everything he had always believed, all his philosophy of technological advancement and innovation, seemed worthless in the face of that silent accusation. If he really cared, but he had never thought about those lives before, not like this, until now. The woman took a step toward the street, as if she were ready to cross the space between them, to close the invisible distance that separated them, and Musk, still in the car, took a deep breath, knowing he was about to make a decision that would change everything. He could leave and continue running from the past as he always had. But the question now wasn't just what he would do, but whether he could live with what was about to happen if he stayed. Time seemed to slow down. She kept moving forward, now clearly directed toward the car. Her gaze was no longer vague, no longer distant. She knew. Musk felt his heart race, but at the last second, just as she was about to come too close, he heard a voice from the past, one he hadn't listened to in years, echoing in his mind. "You will never escape who you are." The phrase, spoken by someone he had tried to erase from memory, now returned with full force as if fate were sealed. The woman continued advancing, each step slow and deliberate, as if she sensed that the moment of truth was just seconds away. Her gaze was fixed, penetrating, and Musk knew, deep down, that this was no longer a casual encounter. It was a confrontation with something he had always believed he could avoid. In the back seat of the car, his hands trembled slightly, his heart pounding as his mind raced in multiple directions at once. He could leave. A simple command and the driver would pull away, disappearing into the rain and the dark night, leaving behind that woman, her husband, and the entire story that connected them. But now he knew that wouldn't solve anything. The woman would follow him. The truth would continue to chase him, like an impossible shadow to escape. The question was no longer whether she knew or not. The question was what he would do with the truth now that it was so close. Just a few steps away, the woman stopped, her eyes fixed on the car, almost daring him to open the door. The blind husband, still seated, seemed to sense something in the air, as if he felt the change that was about to happen. "He's here, I know he is," she whispered, more to herself than to the man beside her. And at that moment Musk realized that the time for running had come to an end. The decision was right there in the now. But then, something unexpected happened. The blind husband suddenly turned his face toward the woman, interrupting her movement. "Let it go," he said, his voice low but firm, as if he were asking her to give up, to let the past rest. There was pain in his voice, a pain that came from years of carrying the weight of that untold story. But there was also a strange serenity. "We've already lost enough." The woman hesitated, her hands trembling. Musk, watching from inside the car, felt a wave of relief and fear at the same time. Maybe she would back down. Maybe the truth would remain buried for a while longer. But could he live with that? And more importantly, could she? Her eyes sparkled with contained anger, mixed with deep sorrow. "Do you think he deserves this peace?" she asked, almost pleading for an answer, as if she were on the brink of a decision that would change their lives forever. The husband remained silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words. And then, in an unexpected act, she suddenly turned around, retreating back to the makeshift shelter under the bridge. The blind man followed her, silent, saying nothing more. The rain continued to fall. The city around them carried on with its indifferent routine. But inside Musk's car, something had changed forever. He knew that this night wouldn't end there. Musk's eyes remained fixed on the emptiness ahead. The woman had given up, for now. But he knew this wasn't the end. The truth doesn't disappear so easily. This was only the beginning, the prelude to something greater that was about to come. He would have to confront everything: the woman, the husband, the past. But more than that, he would have to confront himself. And what about you? What would you do now if you knew the truth was waiting for you, like a storm about to break? Can the past truly be buried? Or does it always find a way to resurface, demanding the price we've avoided paying for so long? Don't miss the next chapter. The truth is closer than ever, and what Elon Musk does now could change everything. What would you do if you were in his shoes? Would you face the past or keep running? Leave your comment and get ready for the unfolding of this story. Before you go, don't forget to watch the video that appears on your screen now. In it, you'll discover one of the most powerful and emotional moments of Elon Musk's life, a mystery that challenges science and strengthens the faith of millions, a story that few know, but that will change your perspective on who he really is. Click now and dive even deeper into the layers of this intriguing figure, who, in unexpected ways, helps many people. And remember, there's much more to be uncovered. The greatest secret of all is still to come.